Welcome back to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where history becomes a gentle companion for your evening rest. I'm here to guide you through the quiet corridors of time, where ancient civilizations whisper their secrets beneath starlit skies. Tonight, we're traveling far from the familiar lights of our modern world, back to a time when the Arabian Peninsula was a tapestry of forgotten kingdoms, wandering tribes, and sacred oases. Long before the call to prayer echoed across desert sands, long before Mecca became the heart of pilgrimage, this vast land held mysteries that time has nearly erased. Close your eyes now and let your breathing slow. Feel yourself settling deeper into comfort as we prepare for this journey. Tonight, you won't need to remember dates or names, battles or borders. Instead, let these ancient voices carry you like a warm desert breeze, gentle and constant, toward peaceful sleep. Imagine yourself as a traveler from long ago, resting by a small fire as night falls over endless dunes. The day's heat is fading, replaced by cool air that carries the faint scent of frankincense and distant rain. Above you, stars appear one by one in the vast Arabian sky, the same stars that guided merchants and nomads across these sands for thousands of years. This is where our story begins, in a world both harsh and beautiful, where survival required wisdom, courage, and an unbreakable connection to the rhythms of desert life. The people we'll meet tonight were shaped by extremes of scorching sun and bitter cold, by abundance and scarcity, by the constant dance between isolation and connection that defined life in this crossroads of ancient worlds. Let your mind drift. Now, as we step back through 20 centuries of history, back to a time when the Arabian Peninsula was young, wild, and filled with possibilities. Tonight, you are safe, warm, and cradled by stories that have waited patiently in the desert winds for someone to listen. Take another slow, deep breath. Feel the gentle weight of comfort surrounding you. And now, let us begin our journey into the ancient heart of Arabia, where time moves like shifting sand, and every grain holds a story worth telling. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the world's largest continuous sand desert, the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. The morning sun has just touched the horizon, painting the endless dunes in shades of gold and amber that seem to glow from within. This vast sea of sand stretches beyond imagination, a place so remote and challenging that even today, few dare to venture into its heart. But this desert was never truly empty. For thousands of years, it was home to people who understood its moods, who could read the subtle signs that meant the difference between life and death. These were the Bedouins, the children of the desert, whose very name means dwellers in the open. As you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine walking beside one of these desert dwellers as the cool dawn air fills your lungs. Your feet sink slightly into sand that still holds the memory of yesterday's heat. In the distance, a camel bells softly, and you hear the gentle murmur of voices as a family prepares for another day's journey across this ancient landscape. The Arabian Peninsula in those days was a land of dramatic contrasts. While the empty quarter stretched like an ocean of silence in the south, the western mountains of the Hijaz caught precious clouds and coaxed rain from reluctant skies. These mountains, dark and forbidding against the endless blue, created valleys, where date palms grew tall and springs bubbled up from hidden sources deep in the earth. Between the mountains and the great desert lay 1,000 variations of this theme. There were valleys where grass grew thick after the brief winter rains, places where entire tribes would gather their flocks and celebrate the temporary abundance. There were salt flats that gleamed white as snow under the relentless sun, and volcanic fields where black basalt rocks created landscapes that seemed almost otherworldly. In scattered oases, life bloomed in defiant green. Palm trees created pools of shade where children played, and women wove baskets from dried fronds. Clear water, the most precious substance in this harsh world, bubbled up from underground springs, creating gardens of date palms, citrus trees, and vegetables that seemed impossibly lush against the surrounding brown and gold of desert. The people who called this challenging land home were shaped by its demands. There were three main ways of life in ancient Arabia, each adapted to different aspects of this harsh but beautiful environment. First were the true nomads, the Bedouins who followed their herds of camels, goats, and sheep across vast territories. These people lived in black goat hair tents that could be taken down and loaded onto camels in less than an hour. They knew every well, every pasture, every safe passage across hundreds of miles of seemingly identical terrain. Their wealth was counted in animals, their honor in the loyalty they showed to family and tribe. Then there were the settled folk of the oases, who had learned to coax life from the desert's scattered green spots. These people built houses of mud, brick, and stone, planted gardens, and created the stable communities where crafts could flourish and knowledge could be preserved. They were the blacksmiths and weavers, the date farmers, and well diggers who provided services that even the proudest nomads sometimes needed. Finally, there were the merchants of the growing trade cities, people who had discovered that their peninsula's position between Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean made it a natural bridge for goods and ideas. These urban Arabs were developing a cosmopolitan outlook, learning languages, managing complex business relationships, and slowly accumulating the wealth that would eventually make some Arabian cities rivals to the great capitals of the ancient world. But no matter which life they chose, all these ancient Arabians shared certain qualities that the desert had taught them. They valued independence above almost everything else, having learned that in the desert, you must be able to rely on yourself and your immediate family when crisis comes. They practiced hospitality as a sacred duty, knowing that the stranger at your tent might be your own salvation when you are lost and desperate far from home. They developed a fierce loyalty to their blood relatives, understanding that in a world without police or armies, your kinsmen were your only reliable protection. And they cultivated a patient endurance that allowed them to survive hardships that would have broken people from gentler lands. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine yourself adopted into one of these ancient desert families. Feel the security of belonging to a group that will never abandon you, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can survive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Let the rhythm of your breathing match the steady pace of a camel crossing the desert, slow and measured and perfectly suited to the long journey ahead. The stars that shine down on you tonight are the same stars that guided these ancient people across trackless wastes. Let their light carry you gently toward sleep, knowing that you are part of an ancient human story of adaptation, survival, and the endless search for home in a vast and beautiful world. Now let your mind drift southward toward the mountainous region where Yemen lies today. Here, where the monsoon winds from the Indian Ocean brought precious rain to terraced hillsides, some of the earliest kingdoms in Arabian history took root and flourished. Close your eyes and breathe deeply as we travel back nearly 3,000 years to a time when great queens ruled from marble thrones and mighty dams held back the seasonal floods. The first whispers of these kingdoms come to use like half-remembered dreams. Around the 10th century before Christ, when King Solomon ruled in Jerusalem and Homer was composing his epic poems in distant Greece, the people of southern Arabia were already building something remarkable. They had learned to capture the brief, but violent rains that came with the monsoon, storing water in great reservoirs and channeling it through elaborate networks of canals and terraces. Imagine yourself walking through the ancient city of Mebe in the early morning, when the air is still cool and sweet with the scent of frankincense trees. The cobblestone streets are already busy with merchants preparing their caravans, but there's a peaceful rhythm to the activity that speaks of centuries of prosperity and security. Above you, the great dam stretches across the valley like a stone giant, its massive walls holding back enough water to keep this entire region green throughout the dry season. This is the kingdom of Sheba, perhaps the most famous of all the ancient Arabian realms. The queen who may have visited Solomon, bringing gifts of gold and spices, ruled from cities like this one. But the real treasure of Sheba was not gold or silver, but knowledge. These were people who had mastered the art of living in harmony with their harsh environment, who had learned to make the desert bloom. The Sabaeans, as they called themselves, developed a form of writing that looked like a cross between Egyptian hieroglyphs and the alphabet we know today. On stone tablets and bronze plaques, they recorded their laws, their religious ceremonies, and their business transactions. They built temples to gods whose names are now forgotten, but whose carved images still watch over ruined cities with eternal stone eyes. As your breathing grows slower and more peaceful, picture yourself resting in the shade of one of these ancient temples. The walls around you are covered with inscriptions in that beautiful, flowing script, telling stories of successful harvests, of caravans that returned safely from distant lands, of offerings made to ensure the continuing favor of the gods. The stone is warm from the sun, but not uncomfortably hot, and a gentle breeze carries the sound of water flowing through irrigation channels nearby. To the east of Sheba lay the kingdom of Hadramaut, home to the most precious commodity in the ancient world. Here, in valleys protected by towering cliffs, grew the frankincense trees whose aromatic resin was worth more than gold in the temples and palaces of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The Hadrami people became master botanists, learning exactly when and how to cut the bark of these trees to produce the highest quality incense. Picture the frankincense harvest as it might have been in those ancient days. Groups of workers moving carefully through groves of these special trees, making precise cuts in the bark with sharp knives. The trees respond by weeping tears of pale resin that harden in the desert air into translucent pearls of gold and white. The scent that rises from these tears is unlike anything else on earth, clean and pine-like, but with deeper notes that seem to open pathways in the mind toward contemplation and peace. The kingdom of man, though smaller than its neighbors, became known throughout the ancient world for its skilled craftsmen and traders. Manian bronze work was prized from India to Spain, and their merchants developed a reputation for honesty that made their word as good as any written contract. They were the bankers of the ancient Arabian trade routes, the people who could arrange credit for a caravan in Babylon and have it honored in Alexandria. And then there was Cataban, the kingdom that controlled many of the mountain passes between the frankincense country and the great trade routes to the north. The Catabanians became masters of logistics, the people who knew how to move valuable cargo safely across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. Their caravanserais, the fortified rest stops they built along the trade routes, became legendary for their hospitality and security. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement of all these southern Arabian kingdoms was their understanding of water. In a land where rain might not fall for years at a time, they created engineering marvels that would impress even modern hydraulic engineers. The Great Dam at Marib, built sometime around the 8th century before Christ, was over 2,000 feet long and nearly 60 feet high. It didn't just hold back floodwaters. It was part of a complex system that distributed water precisely, where and when it was needed. Imagine standing on the ramparts of this great dam as the sun sets behind the mountains. Below you, the captured waters spread out like a lake of liquid gold, reflecting the last light of day. All around this artificial lake, green fields stretch away into the distance, dotted with date palms and fruit trees. The air is filled with the sound of flowing water and the calls of birds that have come to drink at the lake's edge. This was more than just engineering. It was a kind of magic that transformed one of Earth's harshest environments into a garden. The people who built these systems understood that their survival depended not just on individual skill or courage, but on their ability to work together across generations to maintain something larger than any one person could create. The kingdoms of southern Arabia lasted for over 1,000 years, rising and falling with the rhythms of trade and climate, war and peace. Their kings and queens are mostly forgotten now, their palaces buried under centuries of sand. But their legacy lives on in the genetic memory of every person who has ever learned to make something beautiful and lasting in a place where nature seems to offer only obstacles. As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed tonight, let yourself feel connected to these ancient builders and dreamers. They too knew the satisfaction of a day's work well done, the peace that comes from falling asleep in a secure place, surrounded by people you love. They too looked up at the same stars that shine down on you now, and found in them a sense of wonder and belonging to something vast and eternal. Let the gentle sound of water flowing through ancient irrigation channels carry you toward sleep, knowing that the human capacity to create beauty and abundance, even in the harshest places, is as eternal as the desert winds that still blow across the ruins of their great cities. As you breathe slowly and deeply, let your mind follow an ancient caravan as it winds its way north from the frankincense groves of southern Arabia. The sun is just beginning to rise, painting the desert in soft pastels of rose and gold, and the air carries a fragrance so pure and sacred that it seems to lift your spirit toward something divine. This is the story of frankincense, the tears of the gods, and the legendary trade route that made the Arabian Peninsula the bridge between worlds. For over 1,000 years, this precious resin was more valuable than gold, more sought after than silk or precious stones. It was the foundation of empires, the source of immense wealth, and the reason why the harsh deserts of Arabia became highways for the world's most important commerce. Picture yourself walking among the frankincense trees in the early morning, when the air is still cool and the overnight dew has made the desert air uncommonly sweet. These are not large trees, perhaps 15 feet tall at most, with small leaves and unremarkable flowers. But hidden in their bark is one of nature's most extraordinary gifts. When the tree is carefully wounded with a sharp blade, it responds by weeping tears of aromatic resin that harden into translucent pearls of amber and white. The people who first discovered this miracle understood that they had found something sacred. The smoke that rose when these resin tears were placed on hot coals didn't just smell beautiful. It seemed to carry prayers upward to the heavens, to purify spaces where the divine might choose to dwell, to create an atmosphere where healing and meditation came naturally. Close your eyes and imagine the scent filling the air around you now. Frankincense has a clean, almost pine-like fragrance, but underneath that freshness are deeper notes, warm and resinous, that seem to slow your breathing and quiet your mind. It's a scent that speaks of ancient temples and royal palaces, of ceremonies conducted under starlit skies, of moments when the boundary between earth and heaven becomes thin and permeable. The harvest of frankincense was a ritual as much as it was work. The trees could only be tapped at certain times of year when the sap was flowing properly. The cuts had to be made with precision, deep enough to cause the tree to weep its precious tears, but not so deep as to damage the tree permanently. Too much haste, and next year's harvest would be poor. Too little patience, and this year's yield would be small. The harvesters worked in the early morning hours when the air was cool and their hands were steady. They moved from tree to tree like dancers, each cut placed with the skill that came from generations of accumulated knowledge. Behind them came the collectors, gathering the hardened tears into leather pouches, sorting them by size and color and translucency. But the real magic began when these precious pearls left their native groves and started their long journey north. The incense route as it came to be known, was one of the great trade arteries of the ancient world, stretching over 2,000 miles from the frankincense country in what is now Oman and Yemen, all the way to the Mediterranean ports where Roman merchants waited with bags of gold. Imagine yourself joining one of these great caravans as it prepares to leave the frankincense country. The camels stand in long lines, their great humped backs already loaded with precious cargo, carefully wrapped in leather and canvas. Each animal can carry several hundred pounds, and a large caravan might include 1,000 camels or more. The sound they make as they rise to their feet and begin to move is like a symphony of bells and grunts and shuffling feet on sand. At the head of the caravan rides the caravan master, a man whose knowledge of desert routes, water sources, and political conditions can mean the difference between enormous profit and catastrophic loss. He knows which tribal territories are safe to cross and which require diplomatic gifts or armed guards. He knows where to find water in a landscape that looks uniformly barren to untrained eyes. Most importantly, he knows the ancient code of desert hospitality that can turn potential enemies into protectors. The route north from the frankincense country was not a single road, but a network of paths that changed with the seasons, the political situation, and the availability of water and pasture. In general, the caravans followed the western edge of the great desert, staying close enough to the mountains to find occasional wells and oases, but far enough into the desert to avoid the most heavily settled areas where bandits might be numerous. As your breathing grows slower and more peaceful, picture yourself riding with this caravan as it makes its way across landscapes of almost impossible beauty. Sometimes you travel through valleys where flash floods have carved intricate patterns in red and yellow sandstone. Sometimes you cross plains of black volcanic rock where the only sound is the soft padding of camel feet and the gentle tinkling of the bells that hang from their necks. At night, the caravan stops at wells that have been used by travelers for thousands of years. These are magical places, green islands of life in an ocean of sand and stone. Date palms create circles of shade around springs of clear, sweet water. The camels drink deeply and then settle down to rest, their great bodies forming natural windbreaks for the tents that spring up around them. The great cities along the incense route became wealthy beyond imagination from the taxes and fees they collected from passing caravans. Places like Nairan, with its towering castle and irrigated gardens, or Mecca, strategically placed where several trade routes converged, grew rich on the profits from frankincense and the other precious goods that flowed along these ancient highways. The incense route carried more than just commercial goods. It was a pathway for ideas, for religious beliefs, for artistic styles, and technological innovations. A merchant who set out from the frankincense groves might return months later with not just gold and silver, but with stories of distant lands, new techniques for working metal or weaving cloth, different ways of understanding the divine. The Arabian merchants who controlled this trade became some of the most cosmopolitan people of the ancient world. They learned to speak multiple languages, to navigate the complex customs of different cultures, to serve as diplomatic bridges between empires that had never directly communicated. They developed banking systems that allowed a letter of credit issued in one city to be honored in another city, 1,000 miles away. As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, imagine yourself as one of these ancient merchants returning home after a successful journey. Your camels are loaded not with frankincense now, but with Roman gold, Chinese silk, Indian pearls, and Egyptian papyrus. More valuable than any of these material goods, however, are the memories you carry, the sense of having been part of something larger than any individual life. You have seen the great lighthouse of Alexandria, walked through the markets of Damascus, negotiated with princes and kings. You have slept under foreign stars and drunk water from wells blessed by different gods. But now you are coming home, to the desert you love, carrying riches that will benefit your family and tribe for generations to come. Let the ancient rhythm of camel bells and the whisper of wind across sand carry you gently toward sleep, knowing that you are part of an unbroken chain of human connection that has linked distant lands and different peoples for thousands of years. The frankincense that once carried prayers to heaven now carries you toward peaceful dreams. Now let your mind drift toward the sacred spaces of ancient Arabia, where incense smoke once curled upward from stone altars, and the names of forgotten gods were whispered in languages that time has nearly erased. Close your eyes and breathe deeply as we enter a world where the divine was found not in distant heavens, but in the immediate presence of springs and stones, stars, and sacred groves. Before the great monotheistic faiths came to dominate the Arabian Peninsula, the desert was alive with spirits and deities who watched over every aspect of daily life. These were gods who understood thirst and hunger, who knew the desperate relief of finding water after days of searching, who felt the fierce joy of successful hunts and profitable trades. They were as real and immediate to their worshippers as the sun that burned overhead and the stars that guided travelers through the night. Picture yourself approaching the ancient sanctuary at Mecca in the early morning, when pilgrims from across the peninsula are gathering for one of the great seasonal festivals. The sacred enclosure, known as the harem, is already filled with people from dozens of different tribes, each bringing their own tribal gods and goddesses to participate in this ancient celebration of unity and devotion. At the center of the sanctuary stands the Kaaba, but not the austere black cube that modern pilgrims know. This ancient version is decorated with carved images and hung with colorful textiles. Inside and around it are housed the idols of many different peoples, kind of divine democracy where gods from the mountains, the desert, and the oasis all find welcome. The most important of these deities is Hubal, the great god of Mecca itself, whose statue stands inside the Kaaba, carved from red agate and decorated with gold. Hubal is a god of divination, the one to whom merchants and tribal leaders come when they need to make decisions that could mean life or death for their people. His priests cast special arrows to divine the will of heaven, and his answers are sought before caravans depart and before warriors march to battle. But perhaps more beloved by the common people are the three great goddesses who are daughters of the supreme deity. Allat, whose name means simply the goddess, is the mother figure who watches over the settled communities, the goddess of the harvest and the hearth, of marriages and births, and all the gentle cycles of domestic life. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, imagine sitting in the shade of Allat's sacred tree, a great tamarisk that has grown for centuries beside a spring in the oasis town of Taif. The tree's branches create a natural temple, and offerings of dates and milk and woven cloth hang from its limbs like prayers made visible. The sound of water bubbling up from the spring mingles with the soft conversation of pilgrims who have come to ask the goddess for her blessing. Aluza, the mighty one, is the goddess of the morning star, the brilliant light that appears just before dawn to guide travelers and herald the coming day. Her sanctuary lies in a valley between Mecca and Taif, where three sacred trees mark the spot where heaven touches earth. Warriors pray to Aluzi before battle, and young lovers invoke her name when they catch sight of her star rising in the pre-dawn sky. And then there is Manat, the goddess of fate and time, the one who spins the thread of destiny for every human life. Her shrine stands on the coast between Mecca and Medina, where pilgrims come to ask not for victory or prosperity, but for understanding, for the wisdom to accept what cannot be changed and the courage to endure what must be endured. These three goddesses are worshipped not just as distant divine beings, but as intimate companions in the struggle of daily life. Mothers nursing sick children whisper prayers to Allat in the middle of the night. Merchants setting out on dangerous Journeys invoke Alusa as her star appears on the horizon. Old people feeling the weight of years make pilgrimage to Manat, seeking peace with the approaching end of their earthly journey. But the pantheon of ancient Arabia includes many more deities, each reflecting some aspect of life in this harsh but beautiful land. There is Du Shara, the Lord of the Mountains, worshipped especially by the Nabataeans, who carved their rose-red city of Petra from living rock. There is Almaka, the bull god of the moon, whose crescent horns appear on countless altars throughout the southern kingdoms. The Bedouins of the deep desert worship Atarsamane, Lord of the morning star, whose light guides them across trackless wastes. The people of the oasis honor local spirits of springs and groves, nameless powers that make the difference between life and death in their small green worlds. Even individual families have their own household gods, simple stone figures that watch over the family tent and bless the daily routines of desert life. The rituals of these ancient religions are as varied as the people who practice them. Some involve elaborate ceremonies conducted by trained priests in great stone temples. Others are as simple as a Bedouin pouring a little water on the sand and whispering a prayer for safe travel. Some require costly sacrifices of camels or precious goods. Others ask for nothing more than sincerity and a willing heart. Picture yourself participating in one of the great seasonal festivals at Mecca, when tribes that are normally scattered across thousands of miles of desert come together for trade, diplomacy, and worship. The air is thick with incense smoke and filled with the sound of drums and chanting. Poets compete to create the most beautiful verses honoring the gods, while merchants display goods from across the known world. At the sacred well of Zamzam, pilgrims perform ritual ablutions, washing away the dust of travel and the accumulated weight of daily concerns. They drink the sweet water that has bubbled up from this spring for countless generations, tasting in it something that connects them to all the pilgrims who have come before and all who will come after. As the sun sets and the ceremonies reach their climax, hundreds of lamps are lit around the sanctuary. The dancing flames create shifting patterns of light and shadow on the carved walls, and for a moment it seems as if the stone gods are breathing, as if the barrier between the human and divine worlds has become permeable. But these are not the fierce, judgmental deities of later monotheistic tradition. The gods of ancient Arabia are more like wise elder relatives, understanding the harsh realities of desert life, sympathetic to human weakness, ready to help, but not expecting perfection. They know that survival in this land requires pragmatism as well as faith, that sometimes the right choice is not the pure choice, that mercy is often more important than justice. As you settle deeper into the peaceful rhythm of sleep, let yourself feel held by this ancient understanding of the sacred. These forgotten gods knew that the divine is found not in distant perfection, but in the immediate presence of life itself. In the taste of water when you are thirsty, in the sight of green plants after long drought, in the warmth of a fire when the desert night grows cold. Their temples may be ruins now, their names whispered only by the wind across empty sands. But the truths they embodied remain as eternal as the stars that still shine down on the Arabian desert, carrying you gently toward dreams where the sacred and the everyday dance together in perfect harmony. The evening fire crackles softly as our journey through ancient Arabia continues. The stars above seem to whisper secrets of honor and loyalty, of bonds forged not in palaces or temples, but around countless campfires just like this one. Tonight, we venture into the heart of Bedouin society, where the desert itself shaped not just the landscape, but the very souls of its people. Imagine, if you will, a vast expanse of golden sand stretching endlessly in every direction. Here, beneath this same starlit sky, lived warriors whose names have been carried on the desert wind for over 1,000 years. These were not the warriors of great empires or mighty kingdoms, but something far more enduring, the guardians of honor itself. In the pre-Islamic world of Arabia, before the call to prayer echoed across the dunes, society was built upon something as ancient as the desert itself, the tribe. Picture these communities not as mere collections of families, but as living, breathing organisms bound together by invisible threads stronger than any chain. Blood was thicker than water, yes, but in the desert, tribal loyalty was thicker than blood itself. The concept of honor, what the Arabs called muruwa, flowed through these communities like an underground spring, sustaining life in ways both seen and unseen. A man's honor was not his alone. It belonged to his entire lineage, stretching back through generations of ancestors and forward to children not yet born. To understand this, close your eyes and feel the weight of centuries upon your shoulders, not as a burden, but as a crown worn by every member of the tribe. When a Bedouin warrior rode across the shifting sands, his camel's hoofbeats marking rhythm against the ancient earth, he carried with him more than just weapons and water. He carried the reputation of his father, his grandfather, and all who came before. Each decision, each word spoken, each moment of courage or cowardice would echo through his bloodline like ripples across a still oasis pool. The tribal structure was elegant in its simplicity, yet complex in its implications. At its heart sat the sheik, not a king commanding from a throne, but a father figure chosen for his wisdom, his generosity, and his ability to speak the words that could unite quarreling kinsmen around a common fire. Picture him now, an elder with eyes that held the depth of desert wisdom, his weathered hands gesturing as he settled disputes with the patience of one who knew that hasty words could lead to years of bloodshed. But it was the concept of revenge, the sacred duty of tar, that truly defined the warrior culture of ancient Arabia. This was not the hot-blooded vengeance of a moment's anger, but something far more profound and enduring. When harm came to any member of the tribe, it created an imbalance in the cosmic order that could only be restored through retribution. The blood debt, once incurred, could wait years or even decades for payment, passed down from father to son, like a family heirloom made of shadows and obligation. Listen now to the story of the great tribal war between the Aus and Khazraj, two Arab tribes who would later find peace in the oasis city of Yathrib, which we now know as Medina. For over a century, these two peoples lived as neighbors, their children playing together by the same date palms, their merchants trading in the same markets. Yet beneath this peaceful surface, old grievances simmered like coals buried in sand. The spark that ignited the famous Battle of Bu'ath came, as such sparks often did, from a matter of honor and a woman's choice. A woman of the Khazraj had been promised to a man of the Aus, but her heart belonged to another of her own tribe. When she chose love over alliance, the slight to Aus honor could not be ignored. What began as a family dispute grew like a desert storm, drawing in clan after clan until the very air seemed thick with the weight of impending conflict. On that fateful day at Bu'ath, the warriors faced each other across the sandy battlefield, their spears glinting in the harsh Arabian sun. But this was not war, as we might imagine it today. It was something far more personal, more intimate. Each man could likely name his opponents, knew their fathers, had perhaps shared bread with them in times of peace. Yet duty called, and duty in the desert was as inexorable as the sunrise. The battle raged with the fierce beauty of desert lightning, sudden, brilliant, and devastating. When the dust finally settled and the wounded were carried from the field, both tribes had paid a terrible price. The Khazraj emerged victorious, but victory in such conflicts was always bittersweet, for the blood spilled belonged to the same desert, the same people, the same ancient heritage. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this warrior culture was not its capacity for violence, but its ability to transform conflict into art. The Bedouin tribes were not merely fighters. They were poets, and in their poetry lay their truest weapon. Around countless campfires, as the desert night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, these warriors would recite verses that could cut deeper than any sword. The poet warriors, known as Sher, held a position of immense respect within tribal society. They were the keepers of memory, the chroniclers of heroic deeds, and the architects of reputation. Their words could elevate a brave warrior to legendary status, or condemn a coward to eternal shame. In a world without written records, where history lived only in human memory, the poet's tongue was mightier than any blade. Picture now the scene. So common across ancient Arabia, the tribe gathered in a circle around the dying embers of their fire, the desert silence broken only by the soft shuffling of camels and the voice of the poet beginning his recitation. His words would flow like honey from a comb, painting pictures in the minds of his listeners, images of galloping horses, flashing swords, beautiful women with eyes like desert springs, and warriors whose courage blazed brighter than the stars. Above, these weren't mere entertainers. They were the soul of their people made manifest in verse. Through their poetry, the scattered tribes of Arabia shared a common language of honor, beauty, and valor. A poem composed by a Bedouin in the furthest reaches of the Rub al-Khali Desert might find its way to the markets of Mecca, carried on the tongues of traders and travelers, binding the diverse peoples of the peninsula together with threads of shared imagery and common ideals. The themes of their poetry reflected the values at the heart of Bedouin society. They sang of hospitality, the sacred duty to welcome even an enemy into one's tent if he came seeking shelter. They celebrated loyalty, the unbreakable bonds between tribesmen and tribesmen, between warrior and chief, between the living and the honored dead. And they mourned with exquisite beauty, their elegies for fallen heroes capturing not just personal loss, but the eternal tragedy of lives cut short in their prime. One cannot speak of tribal poetry without mentioning the remarkable women who mastered this art. Al-Khansa, the greatest elegist of pre-Islamic Arabia, wielded words with such power that even her tribal enemies would fall silent when she began to recite. Her laments for her fallen brothers became the gold standard by which all mourning poetry was measured, her voice carrying across the centuries to remind us that in the desert, grief too was a form of warfare, a battle against the finality of death itself. As we drift deeper into this ancient world, imagine yourself as part of a great migration across the desert. Your tribe has decided to seek new grazing grounds for your camels and goats, and the entire community moves as one: men, women, children, elders, and animals forming a long procession across the sun-baked earth. The rhythm of travel becomes a meditation, the swaying of the camel beneath you, the soft whisper of sand against leather, the distant call of the guide marking the way to the next water source. In such moments, the harsh realities of tribal warfare seem far away. Here, in the simple act of survival and movement, you glimpse the deeper truths that bound these desert peoples together. The sharing of water when supplies ran low, the protection of the weak during sandstorms, the quiet heroism of daily endurance. These too are forms of honor, perhaps more precious than any won on the battlefield. The tribal system, for all its capacity for violence, was fundamentally about survival in an environment that showed no mercy to the unprepared or the alone. In the vast emptiness of the Arabian Peninsula, where a wrong turn could mean death, and a dried well could doom an entire community, the bonds of kinship were literally matters of life and death. The warrior's code was not merely about glory or revenge. It was about creating a social structure strong enough to preserve human life in one of Earth's most challenging environments. As our exploration of this warrior culture draws to a close, we find ourselves at another campfire, this one perhaps existing only in the realm of dreams and memory. The faces around the fire are timeless. They could belong to Bedouins from any century, for the desert shapes its people in patterns as eternal as the dunes themselves. The old stories are being told again. The ancient poems recited with the same reverence they received 1,000 years ago. Listen carefully to the desert wind as it carries away the last words of our warrior poets. Their voices fade into the greater symphony of night sounds, the distant call of an owl, the soft breathing of sleeping camels, the gentle settling of sand as the earth prepares for rest. In this peaceful moment, the violence and passion of tribal warfare seems not cruel or senseless, but part of a larger pattern, a way of life that created its own fierce beauty, even as it tested the limits of human endurance. The tribal warriors of ancient Arabia have left us more than stories of battles won and lost. They have given us a vision of honor that transcends mere victory, of loyalty that outlasts life itself, and of words that can transform the brutal realities of survival into something approaching art. As you settle into sleep, let their courage become yours, their poetry your dreams, their desert homeland the landscape of your peaceful rest. The sand is cooling now beneath the starlit sky, and the last embers of our campfire are fading to ash. The warriors have sheathed their swords and loosened their sandals, ready to rest, until tomorrow's sun calls them to new adventures. In this moment between day and night, between story and silence, let yourself become part of their eternal journey across the shifting sands of time and memory. As the desert wind carries away the echoes of ancient warrior songs, our journey through pre-Islamic Arabia leads us now to one of its most extraordinary chapters. Here, where the harsh beauty of the desert meets human ingenuity at its finest, we encounter a people who dared to dream in stone and water, the Nabataeans, masters of the impossible, architects of eternity. Close your eyes and let your mind drift southward from the tribal campfires we have just left, past the rolling dunes and rocky outcroppings, to a place where the landscape itself seems to blush with the colors of dawn. Here, in the heart of what we now call Jordan, but which the ancient world knew as the crossroads between empires, rose the most beautiful secret the desert has ever kept, the rose-red city of Petra. But our story begins not with grand monuments, but with a single footstep in the sand. Picture, if you will, a Nabataean trader in the 4th century before Christ, his weathered face turned toward the horizon as he contemplates a journey that will take him across deserts that have claimed countless lives. In his eyes burns the spark of possibility, the vision of a people who saw opportunity where others saw only emptiness and death. The Nabataeans were, at their heart, children of the desert wind. They emerged from the great Arabian wilderness as nomads, much like the Bedouin tribes we have just encountered, but with them they carried something different, an almost mystical understanding of water, that most precious of desert treasures. Where other peoples saw only barren rock and endless sand, the Nabataeans perceived the hidden arteries of life. Flowing beneath the earth's surface, their genius lay not in conquest through sword and spear, but in conquest through innovation and trade. They became the bridge between worlds, carrying frankincense from the mysterious lands of southern Arabia, spices from the Indies, silk from distant China, all flowing like liquid gold through their desert kingdom toward the hungry markets of Rome and Greece. But it was not enough for them to simply move these treasures across the wasteland. They sought to create something permanent, something that would stand as testament to their vision long after the last caravan had passed. And so they began to build, not upon the sand, but within the very bones of the earth itself. In hidden valleys between towering cliffs of sandstone, they discovered something that would change the face of the desert forever. Rock that could be carved like butter, yet would stand for millennia once the work was done. The stone seemed to glow with an inner fire, shifting from deep red to pink to gold as the sun moved across the sky, as if the very mountains were alive with some ancient magic. The creation of Petra was not the work of a single generation, but of centuries of patient artistry. Imagine the first Nabataean who looked upon that narrow canyon, the Sikh, and envisioned it not as a barrier, but as a grand entrance to a city that did not yet exist. Picture him walking through that twisting passage, his footsteps echoing off walls that seemed to reach toward heaven, his mind already seeing what his hands would create. The Sikh itself became their first masterpiece, a natural cathedral of stone that they enhanced with careful engineering. They carved channels along its walls to direct precious rainwater toward hidden cisterns, transforming what could have been a flash flood's death trap into a carefully orchestrated system for capturing and storing the gift of rare desert rains. Every step through this passage was designed to inspire awe, to prepare the visitor for wonders yet to come. And then, at the end of that mystical journey through stone, came the revelation that still takes the breath away after more than 2,000 years, the treasury Al-Khazna, emerging from the living rock like a vision made manifest. Picture that moment of first glimpse, the intricate columns and pediments, carved with a precision that would make Greek masters weep with envy, the facade glowing rose-pink in the morning light, every detail perfectly preserved by the dry desert air. But the treasury was only the beginning. As you wander deeper into this stone city, let your imagination populate it with the sounds and sights of its golden age. Here, Nabataean merchants counted their profits in gold and frankincense, while their wives adorned themselves with pearls from the Persian Gulf and silk from Chinese looms. Children played in courtyards carved from solid rock, their laughter echoing off walls decorated with motifs that blended Arabian, Greek, and Egyptian influences into something entirely new. The Nabataeans possessed an almost supernatural understanding of their environment. In a land where a single day without water could mean death, they created a hydraulic system so sophisticated that it seems to belong more to Renaissance Italy than to ancient Arabia. They carved cisterns deep into the rock, some capable of holding hundreds of thousands of gallons of precious rainwater. They created settling tanks where sediment could separate from drinking water, and distribution channels that could carry this life-giving resource to every corner of their cities. Their mastery of water was matched only by their understanding of stone. Each facade in Petra tells a story of artistic evolution, of craftsmen pushing the boundaries of what was possible with chisel and hammer. They learned to read the rock like a book, understanding which formations would yield to their tools and which would resist. They developed techniques for carving that allowed them to create spaces of breathtaking beauty, banquet halls that could host hundreds of guests, temples where the very walls seemed to sing with divine presence, tombs that promised their occupants eternal rest in chambers more beautiful than any palace. The artistry of the Nabataeans reflected their unique position as cultural mediators. They were Arabs who traded with Greeks, nomads who built permanent cities, desert dwellers who created gardens. Their art drew inspiration from every civilization they encountered, yet transformed these influences into something uniquely their own. Egyptian Sphinx motifs sat comfortably beside Hellenistic columns, while Arabian geometric patterns provided unity to compositions that might otherwise have seemed chaotic. But perhaps their greatest achievement was not architectural, but linguistic. The Nabataeans spoke Arabic, but they wrote in a script derived from Aramaic, the diplomatic language of the ancient Near East. Over time, this Nabataean script evolved, its flowing lines becoming more and more recognizable to our modern eyes. In quiet scriptoriums carved from the living rock, Nabataean scribes were unknowingly creating the ancestor of the beautiful Arabic calligraphy that would one day grace the Quran itself. As we drift deeper into the world of these remarkable people, imagine yourself as a traveler arriving at Petra in its prime. The sun is setting, painting the entire city in shades of gold and crimson, that seem almost too beautiful to be real. Smoke rises from cooking fires hidden within carved chambers, and the sound of conversation in a dozen languages drifts on the evening air. This is not merely a city, it is a miracle of human determination, a place where the impossible has been made, not just possible, but beautiful beyond description. The daily life of Petra pulsed with the rhythm of international commerce. In the early morning hours, when the stone was still cool from the desert night, caravans would arrive through the Sikh, their camels' bells announcing the arrival of new treasures from distant lands. Nabataean merchants, fluent in Arabic, Greek, and Latin, would examine bolts of silk with the expertise of master craftsmen, testing the quality of frankincense with noses trained to detect the subtlest differences in aroma and purity. The city's temples reflected this cosmopolitan character. While the Nabataeans worshipped their own deities, particularly Dushara, the mountain god, and Aluza, the goddess associated with the planet Venus, they also welcomed the gods of their trading partners. In Petra's sacred spaces, Arabian incense burned before Greek statues, while Egyptian symbols of eternity were carved alongside Nabataean prayers for safe journeys across the desert. But it was in their tombs that the Nabataeans truly revealed their souls. These were not mere burial places, but statements of faith in the continuity of life beyond death. Each tomb was a masterpiece of architecture and symbolism, designed house not just the physical remains of the deceased, but their essence, their achievements, their hopes for eternity. The facades spoke in the language of stone about the deceased's journey through life and their expectations for what lay beyond. The interior chambers of these tombs were marvels of engineering and artistry. Some were simple rectangles carved from the solid rock, but others were complex suites of rooms connected by passages that seemed to map the very structure of the afterlife itself. In the perpetual twilight of these spaces, families would gather for funeral banquets, sharing meals with their departed loved ones in ceremonies that blurred the boundaries between life and death, between memory and presence. As the Nabataean kingdom reached its zenith, Petra became more than a city. It became a symbol of what human beings could achieve when they combined vision with determination, art with engineering, tradition with innovation. Travelers from across the known world would make pilgrimages to see this wonder, returning home with stories that seemed too fantastic to believe. How could a people create such beauty in such a harsh place? How could stone be made to flow like water, to sing like music, to glow like captured sunlight? Yet even as Petra flourished, the seeds of change were already stirring in the wider world. Roman legions were pushing ever deeper into the east, their eagles casting shadows across lands that had known independence for centuries. The Nabataeans, wise in the ways of diplomacy as well as trade, understood that their survival depended not just on the strength of their stone walls, but on their ability to navigate the treacherous currents of imperial politics. For generations, they managed this delicate balance with remarkable skill. They paid tribute when necessary, formed alliances when profitable, and always maintained their essential character as masters of the desert trade routes. Their kings bore names that honored both their Arabian heritage and their Roman connections. Aretas, Malicious, Rabble, rulers who understood that true strength sometimes lay in appearing to bend while never truly breaking. But the desert kingdoms of Arabia were entering a new phase of their long history. The Romans grew ever more sophisticated in their understanding of Eastern trade routes, and they began to question why they should pay Nabataean middlemen when they might control these profitable channels directly. The very success of Petra, its wealth and strategic importance, began to mark it as a target rather than an ally. In the year 106 of the Christian era, the last independent king of the Nabataeans passed into history, and with him ended more than 4 centuries of remarkable achievement. The Roman governor Cornelius Palma arrived in Petra not as a guest or ally, but as a conqueror, transforming the proud desert kingdom into just another province of the ever-expanding empire. The rose-red city did not fall through siege or battle, but through the quieter conquest of administrative efficiency and imperial necessity. Yet perhaps this is where the true greatness of the Nabataeans reveals itself most clearly. Long after their political power had faded, long after the last caravan had paid tribute to a Nabataean king, their greatest creation continued to stand. Petra survived the Romans, the Byzantines, the early Islamic conquests, the Crusades, and the Ottoman Empire. It waded through centuries of abandonment, known only to local Bedouin tribes who recognized in these ancient stones the work of their own distant ancestors. As our journey through this remarkable civilization draws toward its close, imagine yourself walking once more through the sick as twilight deepens into night. The walls around you are no longer just stone, but the accumulated dreams of generations who refuse to accept the limitations of their harsh environment. Each carved surface speaks of human ambition transformed into beauty, of the desert's children, who learned to make permanent what the sand would claim, to create from stone what wind would scatter. The Nabataeans have left us more than monuments. They have given us a vision of what becomes possible when human creativity encounters the challenges of survival. In their hydraulic systems, we see the triumph of engineering over environment. In their art, we witness the birth of a new aesthetic that would influence the Islamic world for centuries to come. In their language, we trace the evolution of the script that would one day carry the words of the Quran to the far corners of the earth. Tonight, as you rest beneath the same stars that once guided Nabataean caravans across the desert, let their story inspire your dreams. Picture yourself as one of their master craftsmen, your tools singing against the responsive stone as a new chamber takes shape within the living rock. Feel the satisfaction of creating something that will outlast not just your own life, but the civilization that gave it birth. In the peaceful darkness, become part of their eternal story, the tale of a people who carved their dreams into stone and left them standing for all time in the rose-red heart of the desert. The night wind whispers through the empty windows of Petra now, carrying the scent of wild sage and the memory of ancient incense. In that gentle sound, we hear the voice of the Nabataeans themselves, speaking across the centuries to remind us that true achievement lies not in conquering the world, but in creating beauty that will endure long after conquest and empire have become merely names in forgotten histories. As the rose-colored stones of Petra fade into the gentle darkness of memory, our journey carries us northward through the shifting sands of time and geography. Here, where the great Arabian Peninsula reaches toward the fertile lands of Mesopotamia. In Syria, we encounter a different kind of desert kingdom, not carved from stone like Petra, but forged in the crucible of imperial rivalry and eternal vigilance. Tonight, we walk among the guardian peoples of Arabia's northern borders, the Lakhmids and Ghassanids, whose swords stood watch between empires. Breathe deeply and let your mind drift to the 6th century of the Christian era, when the world stood divided between two great powers, locked in an endless dance of war and diplomacy. To the east, the Sassanid Empire of Persia stretched from the Indus River to the Euphrates, its fire temples burning bright with Zoroastrian flame. To the west, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome's former glory, controlled the Mediterranean world with its capital gleaming gold at Constantinople. Between these titans lay the Arabian desert, seemingly empty, but actually teeming with peoples who would determine the fate of empires. The Lakhmids ruled from their capital at Hira, a city that rose like a mirage from the Iraqi desert near the Fawn banks of the Euphrates. Picture this oasis of civilization emerging from the vast emptiness, date palms swaying in the desert breeze, their fronds whispering secrets to irrigation channels that carried life-giving water through gardens where Roses bloomed impossibly red against the tan backdrop of sand and stone. Here, in halls cooled by fountains and shadowed by silk awnings, Arab kings held court as allies and vassals of the mighty Sassanid Shahs. The Ghassanids, meanwhile, made their home in the borderlands of Jordan and southern Syria, where the desert gradually gave way to the Mediterranean world. Their capital at Jabia sat at the crossroads between worlds, close enough to Damascus to smell the jasmine in Byzantine gardens, yet rooted firmly in the Bedouin traditions that had shaped their ancestors for countless generations. They served as the shield and sword of Byzantium's eastern frontier, their loyalty purchased with gold and honored with titles that made desert sheiks the equals of Roman senators. To understand these kingdoms, imagine yourself standing at dawn on a hill overlooking the frontier between empires. The sun rises slowly over landscape that seems to shift between worlds with each passing cloud shadow. To your north lie the green fields and olive groves of the settled lands, where farmers wait to tend crops that have grown in the same fields since the time of Abraham. To your south stretches the endless desert, where Bedouin herders are already breaking camp to move their flocks toward distant pastures known only to themselves and the stars. This was the world of the Lakhmids and Ghassanids, a realm where the settled and the nomadic, the imperial and the tribal, the ancient and the evolving existed in constant tension and occasional harmony. They were Arabs who served foreign masters, yet retained their essential Arabian character. They were Muslims before Islam existed, in the sense that they submitted to powers greater than themselves, while never surrendering their souls to alien gods or foreign customs. The Lakhmid kingdom of Hira represented something unique in the pre-Islamic world, an Arab state that achieved sophistication without losing its desert roots. In the royal palace, which archaeologists tell us was built in the Persian style, with magnificent halls and elaborate gardens, Lakhmid kings would hold audiences where Persian courtiers in silk robes sat alongside Bedouin chiefs, whose only adornment was the nobility of their lineage and the sharpness of their swords. King Numan III, perhaps the greatest of the Lakhmid rulers, embodied this synthesis of worlds. He could discuss Persian poetry with visiting scholars from Ctesiphon, negotiate treaties in fluent Aramaic with Sassanid officials, yet still compose verses in the pure Arabic of his Bedouin ancestors. Under his rule, Hira became a center of learning where Christian monks translated Greek philosophy into Arabic, where Persian epics were retold around desert campfires, and where the seeds of what would become Islamic civilization were unknowingly planted in the fertile soil of cultural exchange. The relationship between the Lakhmids and their Sassanid overlords was complex, built on mutual need rather than simple domination. The Persians required reliable allies who understood the desert and its peoples, who could mobilize Bedouin warriors at short notice and guide Persian armies through trackless wastes where a wrong turn could mean death for thousands. In return, they offered the Lakhmids protection from their enemies, access to the wealth of the Persian Empire, and recognition as legitimate rulers rather than mere barbarian chieftains. This arrangement created a unique cultural flowering in the heart of the Arabian desert. Hira became a cosmopolitan city where Persian fire altars stood near Christian churches, where Aramaic inscriptions recorded the deeds of Arab kings, and where the music of the oud mingled with the chanting of Zoroastrian priests. It was here that many of the greatest pre-Islamic Arabic poets found patronage, their verses preserving the memory of this remarkable civilization for future generations. Meanwhile, in the West, the Ghassanids carved out their own distinctive kingdom in the service of Byzantium. Their story begins in the mists of South Arabian legend, with tales of a great migration from the kingdom of Saba, the same realm that had once sent a queen to test the wisdom of Solomon. Whether fleeing drought, war, or simply seeking new opportunities, these Arab tribes moved northward through the peninsula, until they reached the fertile borderlands where Syria meets the desert. The Ghassanid kingdom reached its zenith under kings like Harith ibn Jabala, who bore the Byzantine title of Phylarch, supreme commander of the Arab Federates. Picture him in his palace at Jabia, surrounded by the trappings of both Byzantine ceremony and Bedouin tradition. His throne room might display Christian icons alongside the traditional weapons of his ancestors, while his bodyguards wore ramong, armor over the flowing robes of the desert. The Ghassanid's loyalty to Byzantium ran deeper than mere political alliance. Many of them had embraced Christianity, specifically the Monophysite doctrine that held Christ to have a single divine nature. This theological position put them at odds with both the official Orthodox Christianity of Constantinople and the Nestorianism favored by many Christians in the Persian sphere of influence. Their faith became a bridge between the sophistication of Byzantine theology and the spiritual hunger of the Arabian Peninsula, creating a unique form of desert Christianity that would influence the development of Islam itself. The rivalry between the Lakhmids and Ghassanids reflected the greater struggle between Persia and Byzantium, but it also had distinctly Arabian characteristics. These were not merely proxy wars between foreign powers, but contests for honor and precedence among peoples who shared common ancestors and similar traditions. When Lakhmid and Ghassanid armies met on the battlefield, they fought with the particular intensity that comes from fighting one's own kin over fundamental differences in loyalty and belief. The Battle of Halima, fought in the 6th century between the forces of the Lakhmid king Mundir and the Ghassanid king Harith, exemplifies this complex relationship. The two armies faced each other across a field that had witnessed countless such encounters, each side fighting not just for their imperial patrons, but for their vision of what it meant to be Arab in a world dominated by foreign empires. The battle swayed back and forth throughout the day, with individual warriors calling out challenges in the ancient manner of their Bedouin forebears, even as they fought in formations learned from Persian and Byzantine military manuals. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these border kingdoms was their role as cultural transmitters. In the courts of Hira and Jabia, ideas moved freely between worlds that would otherwise have remained isolated from each other. Persian administrative techniques were adapted for use by Arab tribes. Christian theological concepts were expressed in Arabic poetry. Byzantine artistic motifs were incorporated into desert architecture. Greek philosophical works were translated into Arabic by scholars who understood both the language of Aristotle and the wisdom of the Bedouin. This cultural synthesis created something entirely new, an Arabian identity that was simultaneously cosmopolitan and authentically desert-born. The Lakhmids and Ghassanids proved that Arabs could master the sophisticated arts of statecraft and diplomacy without abandoning the values that had sustained their ancestors through millennia of desert life. They demonstrated that loyalty to foreign powers need not mean the surrender of cultural independence, and that civilization could flourish in forms that owed nothing to Mediterranean or Mesopotamian models. As we wander through the ruins of their achievements, imagine the daily life of these border kingdoms in their prime. In Hira, merchants from India and China would display their wares in bazaars, where the air was thick with the scent of frankincense and Persian perfumes. Lakhmid princes would race their finest horses across courses laid out in the royal gardens, while court poets composed verses that celebrated victories over Byzantine forces and praised the wisdom of Sassanid kings. In Ghassanid territory, the rhythm of life moved to a different beat. Here, Christian hymns would echo across valleys where Bedouin herders drove their flocks, and Byzantine merchants would negotiate deals in Arabic while sipping wine made from grapes grown in monastery vineyards. The Ghassanid kings built churches whose architecture blended Roman engineering with Arabian decorative traditions, creating sacred spaces that seemed to capture something of the infinite vastness of the desert. Sky. Both kingdoms served as laboratories for the synthesis of traditions that would prove crucial to the development of Islamic civilization. The administrative systems they developed for governing tribal confederations would provide models for the early Islamic state. The Arabic poetry they patronized would preserve the linguistic heritage that would be needed to express the Quranic revelation. The theological debates they witnessed between Christians, Zoroastrians, and traditional Arabian religions would prepare the intellectual ground for Islam's encounter with the monotheistic traditions. But like all earthly kingdoms, the Lakhmids and Ghassanids were subject to the inevitable cycles of rise and decline. The endless wars between Persia and Byzantium gradually exhausted both empires, leaving them vulnerable to the new force that was stirring in the heart of Arabia. The last Lakhmid king, Numan IV, died in a Persian prison, victim of court intrigues that he could no longer navigate successfully. The Ghassanids saw their kingdom fragmented as Byzantine policies shifted and new priorities emerged in Constantinople. Yet in their decline, these border kingdoms performed perhaps their greatest service to history. As central authority weakened and imperial attention turned elsewhere, the Arab tribes they had governed began to look inward for leadership and inspiration. The political structures the Lakhmids and Ghassanids had created provided frameworks that could be adapted to new purposes. The cultural synthesis they had fostered created a shared vocabulary of ideas and values that transcended tribal boundaries. As our exploration of these guardian kingdoms draws to a close, we find ourselves once again at the edge of transformation. The 6th century is giving way to the 7th, and across the Arabian Peninsula, changes are stirring that will reshape not just the border kingdoms, but the entire world. In the hills around Mecca, a merchant named Muhammad is beginning to receive revelations that will unite the divided tribes of Arabia under a single banner. The Lakhmids and Lakhmids. Ghassanids had served their imperial masters faithfully, but they had also served a higher purpose that they themselves could not have imagined. They had preserved and refined the Arabian cultural heritage during a crucial period of its development. They had demonstrated that Arabs could create sophisticated political institutions without abandoning their essential character. They had fostered the intellectual and spiritual developments that would make possible the rapid expansion of Islamic civilization. As you prepare for sleep beneath the same stars that once guided Lakhmid and Ghassanid armies across the desert borderlands, let their story remind you of the hidden purposes that often lie beneath the surface of political events. These kingdoms, which seem to exist merely as pawns in the great game between empires, were actually nurturing the seeds of a transformation that would change the course of human history. In your dreams tonight, walk through the royal gardens of Hira, where fountains played music in harmony with the desert wind. Stand in the churches of Jabia, where Arabic hymns praised a God who would soon be known by a new name. Feel the pulse of civilizations in transition, of cultures preparing for synthesis, of a world poised on the brink of revolutionary change. Borders they guarded have long since been redrawn. The empires they served have crumbled into dust. But the legacy of the Lakhmids and Ghassanids lives on its Islamic civilization they helped to nurture into being. In the peaceful darkness, become part of their eternal watch, guardians not just of geographical boundaries, but of the cultural treasures that make human civilization possible. As the echoes of battle fade from the borderlands, and the last embers of empire grow cold in the desert wind, our journey through ancient Arabia turns toward treasures that outlast kingdoms and survive the fall of dynasties. Tonight, we enter the realm of words themselves, those magical combinations of sound and meaning that can capture the flight of an eagle, the beauty of a beloved's eyes, or the sorrow of a warrior's final breath. Here, in the flowing script and soaring poetry of pre-Islamic Arabia, we discover the true immortality that these desert peoples achieved. Let your mind drift now to a quiet scriptorium carved from living rock, perhaps in Petra, or hidden in some forgotten oasis, where a Nabataean scribe sits hunched over his writing surface in the flickering light of an oil lamp. His hand moves with practiced grace, forming letters that seem to dance across the parchment like captured wind. He writes in Aramaic, the diplomatic language of his time, but something new is stirring in his script, curves that soften harsh, angles, flourishes that seem to reach toward some future perfection, yet unimagined. This unnamed scribe, working by lamplight in the silence of the desert night, is participating in one of history's most beautiful transformations. The script flowing from his reed pen carries within it the seeds of what will become Arabic calligraphy, that most sublime of Islamic arts, where the word of God will one day be rendered in forms so beautiful they seem to pulse with divine life. But tonight, in the years before Christ's birth, the scribe knows only that he is recording a bill of sale or perhaps a treaty between tribes, unaware that he is midwife to a revolution in human expression. The evolution of Arabic script is a love story written in flowing ink across centuries of patient development. From the angular certainty of Aramaic letters, through the gradual softening of Nabataean hands, to the emergence of what we recognize as true Arabic writing, each generation of scribes added their own small contribution to this growing miracle. Picture them in their scattered scriptoriums, some in the trading cities along the incense routes, others in monastery libraries where Christian monks preserved both sacred and secular texts, still others in the courts of Arab kings who understood that the ability to record agreements and preserve poetry was itself a form of power. The earliest Arabic inscriptions that archaeologists have discovered read like whispers from a lost world. Carved into rock faces at Jebel Yusais and other sites across the Arabian Peninsula, they record simple messages, the names of travelers, prayers for safe journeys, declarations of love that seemed important enough to preserve in stone. Yet, even in their simplicity, these early texts reveal something profound about the people who created them. Here were nomads and traders, warriors and lovers, who felt compelled to leave permanent marks upon a landscape that seemed to offer only impermanence. But it was in the realm of spoken poetry that the Arabs of the pre-Islamic period achieved their greatest linguistic triumphs. The Arabic language, even in its earliest forms, possessed qualities that made it uniquely suited to poetic expression. Its system of three consonant roots, from which countless variations could be derived, created a web of meaning and association that allowed poets to achieve effects impossible in other languages. A single word could carry multiple layers of significance, each syllable echoing with memories of related terms that enriched and deepened the overall meaning. Imagine yourself seated around a campfire on a night when the desert air is still and the stars seem close enough to pluck from the sky. The flames dance hypnotically, casting shifting shadows on the faces of gathered tribesmen. And from somewhere in the circle comes a voice, not speaking, but chanting, the words rising and falling in patterns that seem to echo the very rhythm of the desert itself. This is the Majlis al-Sher, the gathering of poetry, where the oral traditions of Arabia came alive in all their power and beauty. The poet, the Sher, held a position in pre-Islamic Arabian society that combined the roles of historian, entertainer, propagandist, and spiritual guide. These were not merely versifiers or court entertainers, but individuals believed to possess supernatural powers of insight and expression. The Arabic word shair is related to the verb to perceive or to sense, reflecting the belief that true. Poets possessed a kind of sixth sense that allowed them to perceive truths hidden from ordinary mortals, not in the flickering firelight. The Sher would begin his recitation, his voice trained from childhood to project across the desert silence, to make every syllable clear even when the wind rose. The poems he recited, qasidas that could stretch for over 100 lines, were architectural marvels of language, built according to complex rules of meter and rhyme that had been refined over generations of oral tradition. Yet within these formal constraints, the greatest poets achieved a freedom of expression that could soar to heights of beauty that still take the breath away. The themes of this poetry reflected the values and experiences of desert life. There were poems of praise, Madi, that celebrated the virtues of generous chiefs and brave warriors. Their words more valuable than gold in a society where reputation was everything. There were poems of blame, Hijah, that could destroy an enemy more effectively than any sword. Their satirical barbs carrying such power that entire tribes might be shamed into changing their behavior. And there were poems of longing, Ghazal, that captured the pain of separation from beloved persons or places with an intensity that seemed to distill the very essence of human emotion, but perhaps the most distinctively Arabian of all poetic forms was the nazib, the elegiac prelude that began most formal qasidas with a description of an abandoned campsite. Picture the poet standing among the cold ashes of fires that once warmed his beloved's tribe, the tent pegs that once held her dwelling, now scattered by wind and time. In exquisite detail, he would describe the desolation of the site, the way the rain had washed away all traces of human habitation, the silence where once there had been laughter and conversation. These nazib passages were far more than mere conventional openings. They represented a profound meditation on the nature of time and change, on the way that everything in the desert world, love, tribal alliances, even life itself, was subject to the relentless forces of transformation. The abandoned campsite became a symbol for all of human existence, beautiful in its brief flowering, but ultimately ephemeral as wind-scattered sand. From these melancholy beginnings, the qasida would typically move through several distinct phases. The poet might describe his camel and the hardships of desert travel, using the journey as a metaphor for the spiritual path toward his intended goal. He might recount historical events, praising his own tribe's ancestors while diplomatically acknowledging the virtues of his audience. And he would conclude with his main purpose, perhaps praise for a generous patron, a call to battle against tribal enemies, or a profound reflection on the meaning of honor and nobility. The greatest of these pre-Islamic poets achieved a mastery of language that influenced Arabic literature for centuries to come. Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma crafted verses of such technical perfection that later critics would use them as standards for measuring poetic excellence. Al-Nabiga al-Dubyani became famous for poetry so powerful he could reconcile feuding tribes or drive them to war, depending on his intentions. Tarafa ibn al-Abd packed an entire philosophy of life into poems that celebrated youth, beauty, and the fierce joy of existence in the face of inevitable death. Among the most remarkable figures of this poetic renaissance was Al-Kansa, whose elegies for her fallen brothers became the gold standard for mourning poetry in Arabic literature. Picture her as she might have appeared at tribal gatherings, a woman whose presence commanded attention not through beauty or wealth, but through the sheer power of her artistic gift. When she began to recite her laments, even the most hardened warriors would fall silent, moved by verses that seemed to give voice to every grief the human heart had ever known. Al-Kansa's poetry reveals another crucial aspect of pre-Islamic Arabian culture, the important role that women played as preservers and transmitters of oral tradition. While the warrior culture of the tribes was predominantly male, the realm of poetry and storytelling offered women opportunities for public expression and social influence that were rare in other ancient societies. The female shaira could command respect and attention equal to any male poet, her words carrying the same power to shape tribal opinion and preserve cultural memory. The technical virtuosity of these poets was matched by their role as living libraries of tribal history and cultural wisdom. In a society that remained largely pre-literate, The Shair served as the repository of collective memory. They memorized not only their own compositions, but also the works of their predecessors, creating an unbroken chain of oral transmission that stretched back through generations. A master poet might carry in his memory thousands of lines of verse, each one perfectly preserved with its original rhythm and rhyme scheme intact. This feat of memory was made possible by the sophisticated mnemonic devices built into Arabic poetry. Itself, the strict patterns of meter and rhyme served not just aesthetic purposes, but practical ones. They made the verses easier to remember and harder to corrupt through repeated transmission. The internal logic of the poems, with their conventional themes and structural elements, provided additional frameworks that helped preserve textual integrity across generations of oral performance. The meters of pre-Islamic poetry were themselves marvels of mathematical precision disguised as natural speech rhythm. The system of quantitative verse, based on patterns of long and short syllables rather than stressed and unstressed ones, created possibilities for musical effect that European poetry would not discover until much later. The most popular meters, like the Taal and the Camille, seemed to echo the rhythm of camels' hooves crossing sand, or the rise and fall of wind across dunes, connecting the formal structure of the poems to the natural environment that it shaped. Them got as the 6th century gave way to the 7th. This remarkable tradition of oral poetry was approaching a crucial transformation. The same linguistic genius that had produced the masterpieces of pre-Islamic verse was about to encounter a new purpose, the preservation and transmission of divine revelation. The poets who had perfected Arabic as a medium for expressing human emotion and tribal values were unknowingly preparing the language for its greatest challenge and highest achievement. Yet even as change approached, the essential character of Arabian poetry remained constant. Whether praising a generous chief or lamenting a departed hero, whether describing the beauty of a beloved or the harshness of desert travel, the poets of pre-Islamic Arabia had developed a way of using language that seemed to capture something essential about human experience itself. Their words had the power to make the absent present, to preserve the memory of the dead, to inspire the living to acts of courage and generosity. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the desert air grows cool and the stars begin to fade, imagine yourself as one of these ancient shahirs, your mind filled with verses that seem to pulse with their own inner life. Around you sleep the members of your tribe, trusting in your ability to preserve their stories and celebrate their virtues. In your memory rests the accumulated wisdom and beauty of generations, waiting to be shared when the sun rises and the day's journey begins. The words you carry are more than mere entertainment or even art. They are the very soul of your people made manifest in language. Through your voice, the heroes of the past continue to inspire the warriors of the present. Through your verses, the beauty of the desert world is captured and preserved against the erosion of time. Through your gift for expression, the experiences of individual hearts become part of the collective heritage that defines what it means to be Arab. As our exploration of this linguistic legacy draws toward its close, we find ourselves standing at another threshold. The scripts are evolving, the poetry is reaching new heights of sophistication, and across the Arabian Peninsula, the stage is being set for a revelation that will transform not just Arabic literature, but the entire course of human civilization. The same language that produced the masterpieces of Jahiliyyah poetry is about to become the medium through which the Word of God is revealed to humanity. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let the rhythm of ancient verses carry you into dreams. Feel the power of words to transcend time and space, to make the beautiful permanent and the temporary eternal. In the flowing script of early Arabic calligraphy, in the soaring metaphors of pre-Islamic poetry, discover the preparation for miracles yet to come. The desert wind carries these voices still, and in your peaceful rest, you become part of their endless song. As the desert winds carry the echoes of ancient poets across the dunes, we find ourselves drawn deeper into the spiritual heart of pre-Islamic Arabia. The sand beneath our feet grows softer now, worn smooth by the footsteps of pilgrims and seekers, who walked these paths long before the call to prayer would echo across the land. Here, in this sacred crossroads of belief, three faiths would quietly take root in the Arabian soil, preparing the ground for what was to come, like your breathing. Slow as we walk through the oasis town of Yathrib, later to be known as Medina, where date palms cast long shadows in the afternoon light. The air is filled with the gentle murmur of different languages, different prayers, different hopes all mingling together like streams converging in the desert. Close your eyes and feel the warm breeze that carries with it the stories of those who sought the divine in this harsh, yet beautiful land out in the fertile valleys of Yemen, far to the south where the monsoon rains still blessed the earth. Jewish communities had established themselves as early as the 1st century. These weren't recent arrivals, but families whose roots ran deep into the Arabian soil, going back generations upon generations. Picture the terraced hillsides of the Yemeni highlands, where ancient synagogues stood among frankincense trees, their stones weathered by time, but their purpose unchanged. The Jewish merchants of Himyar had become powerful figures in the incense trade, their caravans winding northward through the mountain passes, carrying not just precious resins and spices, but also the wisdom of their ancestors. In the markets of Mraib and Sana, Hebrew mixed with Arabic, creating a linguistic tapestry as complex and beautiful as the patterns woven into their prayer shawls. But it was in the northern oasis where the Jewish presence became most significant to our story. In Yathrib, three prominent Jewish tribes had made their home. The Banu Kanuka, skilled goldsmiths and metalworkers whose craft was renowned throughout Arabia. The Banu Nadir, who cultivated the finest dates and maintained extensive palm groves. And the Banu Quraiza, whose knowledge of agriculture had helped transform patches of desert into green sanctuaries. Imagine walking through the narrow lanes of Yathrib as the sun begins to set, painting the mud brick houses in shades of amber and gold. From within these homes comes the soft chanting of evening prayers, the Hebrew words flowing like honey in the desert air. These communities had found peace in Arabia, adapting their ancient faith to the rhythms of desert life while maintaining their connection to Jerusalem and the traditions of their forefathers. The synagogues of Yathrib were simple structures, built to blend with the desert architecture around them, yet within their walls burned the eternal flame of faith that had guided the Jewish people through millennia of wandering. Here, children learned to read from scrolls that contained the same words that had comforted their ancestors in Babylon. In Egypt, in the homeland that lived now only in memory and prayer, as our journey continues northward, we encounter another stream in this river of faiths. Christianity had found its way into Arabia through multiple paths, carried by merchants from Syria, by pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, and by monks seeking solitude in the desert wilderness. Unlike the organized Jewish communities, the Christian presence in Arabia was more scattered, more diverse, taking many forms across the vast peninsula. In the northern regions, closer to the Byzantine frontier, entire Arab tribes had embraced Christianity. The Ghassanids, those guardians of the southern border of the Roman Empire, had become champions of the Christian faith, building churches in their capital of Jabia and sponsoring missionaries who carried the gospel deeper into the Arabian interior. Your mind drift these early churches, simple stone structures that rose from the desert floor like prayers made manifest. Inside, the walls were decorated not with the elaborate mosaics of Constantinople, but with desert motifs, palm fronds, and geometric patterns that spoke to the Arabian heart while carrying the Christian message. The services here were conducted in Arabic and Aramaic, the ancient language of Christ himself, creating a bridge between the divine and the desert dwellers who sought spiritual truth The form of Christianity that took root in Arabia was often different from what we might recognize today. Many of the Arab Christians followed the Nestorian tradition, emphasizing the human nature of Christ in ways that set them apart from the official doctrines of both Rome and Constantinople. Others were drawn to Monophysite teachings, believing in the single divine nature of Jesus. These theological differences might seem abstract now, but to those early believers, they represented profound questions about the nature of God and humanity. In the markets of Busra and the trading posts along the caravan routes, Christian merchants would gather for prayer in simple rooms above their shops. They carried with them small crosses made of desert wood, or icons painted on bits of cloth, and sang hymns that blended Greek melodies with Arabic rhythms. Their faith was as adapted to the desert as they were, resilient and practical, yet touched with the mystery of the divine. Some of the most remarkable Christians of pre-Islamic Arabia were the desert hermits, men and women who followed the example of the early church fathers by seeking God in the wilderness. Picture these solitary figures in their rough robes, living in caves carved from sandstone cliffs, surviving on dates and spring water while they devoted their lives to prayer and contemplation. One such hermit was Bahira, a Nestorian monk who lived near the trade route between Syria and the Hejaz. Legend tells us that he possessed an unusual gift for recognizing divine signs, and that he would sometimes emerge from his desert solitude to speak with passing caravans. His simple cell, furnished with nothing but a prayer rug and a few religious texts, became a place of pilgrimage for travelers seeking spiritual guidance. But perhaps the most intriguing religious movement in pre-Islamic Arabia was that of the Hanifs, a word that would later take on great significance in Islamic theology, but which in this earlier period referred to those Arabs who had turned away from the traditional polytheism of their ancestors without necessarily embracing Judaism or Christianity. These Hanifs were seekers, spiritual wanderers, who felt the pull of monotheism but found their own path to the divine. They believed in one supreme God, whom they called Allah, a name that was already ancient in Arabia, derived from the same Semitic root that gave us the Hebrew Elohim. But their worship was distinctly Arabian, adapted to the desert environment and the tribal culture from which they came. Imagine sitting by a campfire with one of these Hanifs as the stars emerge in the desert sky above. He speaks quietly of his search for truth, of how the many gods of his fathers no longer satisfied his soul, of dreams and visions that called him to seek the one true Creator. His prayer is simple, direct, without elaborate ritual or priestly mediation, just a man communing with his Maker beneath the infinite canopy of night. The most famous of the Hanifs was Waraka ibn Nawfal, a cousin of Khadijah, who would later become the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad. Waraka had studied both Jewish and Christian scriptures, translating portions of the Gospel into Arabic, but he remained outside both communities, following his own path to divine truth. In his modest house in Mecca, he would receive visitors who came to discuss matters of faith and philosophy, creating an informal academy of monotheistic thought. Another prominent Hanif was Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, a member of the Quraysh tribe who publicly rejected the worship of idols and spoke eloquently of the one God who created all things. He would often retreat to the cave of Hira, just outside Mecca, where he would spend days in meditation and prayer, seeking direct communion with the divine. These Hanifs created a bridge between the old ways and what was to come. They prepared the Arabian mind for monotheism, creating a vocabulary of faith that would later be incorporated into Islamic teaching. Their emphasis on personal relationship with God, on the rejection of intercession through multiple deities, on the importance of moral behavior over ritual observance, all planted seeds that would bloom in the revelations that were yet to come. As we near the end of our exploration of this religious crossroads, Let yourself feel the quiet anticipation that hung in the desert air. In synagogues and churches, in the cells of hermit monks, and around the campfires of Hanif seekers, prayers were rising into the star-filled sky. Different words, different rituals, but all reaching toward the same infinite mystery. The three faiths existed in a delicate balance, sometimes in conflict, sometimes in cooperation, but always in dialogue. Jewish merchants might find lodging with Christian families during their travels. Hanif seekers might study Jewish scriptures or listen to Christian monks. The boundaries were fluid, porous, allowing for an exchange of ideas that enriched all who participated. This was the spiritual landscape of Arabia on the eve of Islam, not a blank slate, but a complex tapestry of beliefs and seekers, of ancient traditions and new revelations, of communities that had already begun to prepare the way for the great transformation that was approaching like the dawn over the eastern horizon. Feel yourself settling deeper into the warm sand of this ancient time, surrounded by the gentle murmur of prayers in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, by the soft footsteps of pilgrims and seekers, by the whispered hopes of those who sought the divine. In the vast silence of the desert, here, in this crossroads of faith, the stage was being set for one of history's greatest spiritual revolutions. But for now, there is only the peaceful rhythm of devotion, the quiet search for truth, and the eternal human longing for connection with something greater than ourselves. Rest now in this sacred space where different paths to the divine converged in the heart of Arabia, where the seeds of great change were quietly germinating in the fertile darkness of spiritual seeking, preparing to bloom in ways that would transform not just the desert, but the entire world. The desert wind grows still now, as if the very air holds its breath in anticipation. We have journeyed through centuries of Arabian history, walking alongside Bedouin warriors and Nabataean merchants, listening to the poetry of the Jahiliyyah, and witnessing the quiet prayers of Jews, Christians, and Hanifs. Now we find ourselves at the threshold of the most profound transformation in Arabian history, standing in that hushed moment before dawn, when the world seems suspended between what was and what is yet to come. Let your body sink deeper into rest. As we settle into this pivotal moment in time, the year is approaching 570 CE, and across the Arabian Peninsula, the old order is beginning to show the first hairline cracks that will soon become the fissures through which change will flow like water through parched earth. Feel yourself floating on the currents of history, witnessing the final movements of a world that is about to be forever transformed. In the great city of Mecca, the beating heart of Arabian commerce, the morning light reveals a society at the height of its material prosperity, yet struggling with deeper questions of meaning and purpose. The Kaaba stands as it has for generations, draped in rich fabrics that flutter gently in the dawn breeze, surrounded by the 360 idols that represent the diverse spiritual needs of the many tribes who make pilgrimage here. Yet even in this sacred space, there is an undercurrent of unease, a sense that the old ways may not be sufficient for the challenges that lie ahead. Picture the wealthy merchants of the Quraysh tribe as they conduct their morning business in the shadow of the sacred house. Their storerooms overflow with frankincense from Yemen, silk from China, spices from India, and gold from Nubia. The caravan routes that converge on Mecca have made them the wealthiest Arabs in memory, their influence extending far beyond boundaries of the Hijaz. Yet for all their material success, there is something hollow in their laughter, something forced in their celebrations. The prosperity has come at a cost that is becoming increasingly apparent. The old tribal bonds of mutual support and collective responsibility are fraying under the pressure of individual accumulation. The gap between rich and poor has widened into a chasm that threatens to swallow the very fabric of Arabian society. Slaves work in the date groves while their masters recline on silk cushions, debating the merits of different gods with the casual indifference of those who have never known want. Walk with me through the narrow, alleys of Mecca in these final years before the great change. Here, in a modest house near the marketplace, lives a young woman named Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a merchant in her own right who has inherited her father's business acumen and expanded it beyond what many thought possible for a woman in that age. Her caravans travel as far as Syria and Yemen, carrying not just goods, but also ideas, stories, and the subtle influences that will help shape the future. In another part of the city, in the quarter where the Hashim clan makes its home, a child will soon be born who will grow up to transform not just Mecca, not just Arabia, but the entire world. But for now, there is only the quiet anticipation that precedes all great changes. The sense that something momentous approaches on feet as silent as the desert wind. The signs of impending transformation are visible to those who know how to read them. The old certainties are being questioned by an increasing number of thoughtful Arabs. The Hanif movement has grown quietly but steadily, attracting men and women who find themselves unable to bow before stone idols when their hearts cry out for something more transcendent, more universal, more worthy of human devotion. In the desert camps of the Bedouin, the traditional poems that once celebrated tribal glory and individual heroism are being supplemented by verses that speak of justice, of accountability, of a divine order that transcends the petty squabbles of competing clans. The poets themselves seem surprised by these new themes that flow from their lips like water from an unexpected spring. Let your breathing slow as we venture into the cave of Hira, that limestone refuge in the mountains outside Mecca, where seekers have long come to contemplate the deeper mysteries of existence. The cave is cool and quiet, insulated from the heat and noise of the bustling city below. Here, in this natural sanctuary, the Hanifs come to pray and meditate, seeking direct communion with the one God they believe stands behind all the apparent multiplicity of creation. Feel the smooth stone beneath your hands as you settle into this sacred space. The walls have absorbed centuries of prayers, of tears, of moments of revelation and doubt. Through the opening of the cave, you can see the lights of Mecca twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars, while above, the actual constellations wheel in their ancient patterns across the desert sky. This is the spiritual landscape of Arabia in its final pre-Islamic phase, a society materially prosperous, but spiritually restless, politically fragmented, but culturally unified, bound together by language and poetry and the shared experience of desert life, yet divided by tribal loyalties and religious differences that seem increasingly arbitrary and superficial. The great empires that surround Arabia are also showing signs of exhaustion. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's Eastern legacy, is struggling to maintain its hold on Syria and Palestine against the rising power of Sassanid Persia. The Persians themselves, despite their recent military successes, are dealing with internal religious conflicts and the enormous cost of maintaining their vast territories. Both empires have used Arab tribal confederations as buffer states and proxy armies, but this has had the unintended consequence of exposing more Arabs to the sophisticated philosophical and theological traditions of their neighbors in the courts of the Lakhmid kings at Hira and the Ghassanid rulers in Damascus. Arab intellectuals have been engaging with Greek philosophy, Persian wisdom literature, Jewish scriptural commentary, and Christian theological speculation. These ideas percolate slowly southward along the trade routes, carried by merchants and wandering scholars, gradually preparing the Arabian mind for new ways of thinking about God, society, and human purpose. The economic foundation of this transformation is already in place. The incense trade that has enriched Arabia for centuries is beginning to decline as Christian Europe turns away from the elaborate ritual sacrifices that required vast quantities of frankincense and myrrh. But the broader patterns of trade continue to flow through the Arabian Peninsula, and the Arabs have proven themselves to be adaptable and innovative commercial partners. More importantly, the social infrastructure for rapid change exists in the unique Arabic institution of the Tribal Council, where decisions are made through consultation and consensus rather than by royal decree. This tradition of collective decision-making, combined with the Arab respect for eloquent speech and persuasive argument, creates a society that is potentially very responsive to new ideas that can be presented convincingly and demonstrate their practical value. Feel yourself drifting deeper into this liminal moment, suspended between the familiar past and the unimaginable future. In the oasis towns and desert camps of Arabia, people are going about their daily routines, tending their animals, maintaining their equipment, trading their goods, raising their children, largely unaware that they are living through the final phase of a world that is about to pass away forever. Yet there are signs for those who have eyes to see them. The traditional oral poetry of the Arabs is beginning to take on new themes and concerns. Along with the familiar celebrations of bravery, hospitality, and tribal honor, poets are increasingly composing verses about divine justice, about the fate of the soul after death, about the responsibility of the powerful toward the weak and vulnerable. The religious vocabulary of pre-Islamic Arabia is also evolving in subtle but significant ways. Terms like Allah, the God, Rahim, merciful, Ghafor, forgiving, and Hakim, wise, are appearing more frequently in everyday speech, not just in formal religious contexts. The conceptual groundwork for monotheistic revelation is being laid in the very structure of the Arabic language itself, not in the markets of Mecca and Yathrib, in the councils of tribal elders, and the intimate conversations between friends. People are asking questions that have no easy answers within the existing framework of Arabian paganism. Why do the innocent suffer while the wicked prosper? What is the purpose of human existence? Is there justice beyond what can be achieved through tribal law and personal revenge? What happens to the soul after the body dies? These questions hang in the desert air like the scent of distant rain, promising relief from a spiritual drought that has lasted for generations. The old gods seem increasingly remote and irrelevant, mere projections of human desires and fears rather than sources of genuine wisdom and guidance. Even their most devoted worshippers sometimes find themselves going through the motions of ritual observance while their hearts cry out for something more authentic, more transformative, more worthy of ultimate commitment. And so we come to the end of our journey through pre-Islamic Arabia, standing at the threshold of one of history's great transformations. The stage has been set, the characters are in place, the social and spiritual tensions have reached the point where some kind of resolution becomes inevitable. The old synthesis of tribal paganism, commercial prosperity, and political fragmentation can no longer contain the energies that are building within Arabian society. Let yourself rest now in this moment of profound anticipation, when the future presses against the present like dawn against the darkness. Somewhere in the vicinity of Mecca, a child is about to be born who will grow up to become the Prophet Muhammad, the messenger who will proclaim a revelation that will unite the Arabs and send them forth to carry their message to the ends of the earth. But that story belongs to a different chapter in human history. For now, there is only the quiet breathing of a world on the verge of transformation, the gentle stirring of spiritual awakening, the first faint light of dawn beginning to touch the eastern horizon of the Arabian Peninsula. Sleep now in the embrace of this ancient time, surrounded by the whispered prayers of seekers and the soft footfalls of merchants making their way across the sand. Dream of caravans moving slowly through the night toward distant oases, of poets composing verses around dying campfires, of pilgrims circling the Kaaba in the silver moonlight, all unaware that they are participants in the final act of a drama that has been unfolding for over 1,000 years. The desert wind rises again, carrying with it the accumulated hopes and dreams of countless generations, the wisdom of forgotten civilizations, the prayers of the faithful, and the longings of the lost. It whispers of change coming on swift feet, of revelations that will transform the world, of a light that is about to break over the horizon and banish the darkness forever. Rest peacefully in this sacred moment of transition, where the past gathers itself like a held breath before releasing into the limitless possibilities of the future, where the sands of time flow like an hourglass, marking the end of one age and the beginning of another, where the eternal story of human seeking for the divine reaches its crescendo in the vast silence of the Arabian night. And so our journey through the ancient sands comes to its gentle close, like the final notes of a desert lullaby fading into the vast silence of the night. We have walked together through millennia of Arabian history, feeling the pulse of civilizations rise and fall beneath our feet, breathing the same air that filled the lungs of Nabataean stone carvers and Sabaean merchants, of Bedouin poets and Hanif seekers, of all those countless souls who lived and loved and dreamed in this timeless land before the great transformation came. Let yourself settle now into the warm embrace of these ancient memories, feeling the soft desert sand beneath you like the most comfortable bed you have ever known. The stars above shine with the same gentle light that guided caravans across the empty quarter, that watched over the construction of Petra's rose-red facades, that witnessed the first tentative prayers of those who turned away from stone idols to seek the one true God in the vastness of their own heart's dot. As you close your eyes, you can still hear the echoes of all we have encountered together. The rhythmic chanting of Sabaean priests in the great temple of Al-Mecca, their voices rising and falling like the monsoon winds that brought life to the southern highlands. The gentle splash of water flowing through the ingenious channels of Merab's great dam, turning barren valleys into gardens of impossible green. The soft scraping of stylus on clay as scribes recorded the movement of precious goods along the incense routes that connected the known world. Feel the phantom touch of frankincense, smoke curling around your dreams, carrying with it the prayers of a dozen different peoples, the hopes of merchants setting out on journeys that might take them months or years to complete, the whispered conversations of lovers meeting secretly in palm groves, of children listening wide-eyed to their grandparents, stories of heroes and jinn and ancient kings. The desert wind that has been our constant companion throughout this journey continues to blow, carrying away the physical traces of the civilizations we have visited, but leaving their essence embedded in the very atoms of the sand. Somewhere beneath the dunes lie the foundations of forgotten cities, the buried treasures of long-dead kingdoms, the simple graves of countless ordinary people who lived extraordinary lives in their own quiet ways. But their true monument is not made of stone or gold or precious incense. It lives in the words they spoke, the languages they shaped, the stories they told around campfires, the wisdom they passed down through the generations, like precious water shared in times of drought. The Arabic language itself is their greatest gift to the future, a linguistic tapestry woven from threads of Nabataean and Sabaean, of Aramaic and Greek, of all the tongues that mingled in the great cosmopolitan markets of the peninsula. In your dreams tonight, you might find yourself walking through the corridors of Petra's treasury, running your fingers along stone walls that seem to glow with their own inner light. Or perhaps you will sit with the desert hermits in their lonely caves, feeling the profound peace that comes from turning away from the world's distractions to listen for the still, small voice that speaks in the silence between heartbeats. You might dream of joining a caravan setting out from Shabwa at dawn, the camels loaded with precious myrrh and frankincense, the guides reading the stars like an open book, the merchants sharing stories and songs to pass the long hours of travel across landscapes that change color with every shift of the light. Feel the gentle swaying motion of your camel as it finds its rhythm in the endless procession of footsteps that have worn these ancient paths path smoothed out, or your dreams might carry you to the poetry competitions of the pre-Islamic period, where the greatest masters of the Arabic language would weave spells of words more powerful than any magic, creating verses that would live in human memory long after the poets themselves had returned to dust. Listen to the music of their language, the complex rhythms and intricate rhymes that could move listeners to tears or laughter, to love or war, to profound contemplation of life's deepest mysteries. Feel yourself becoming part of this great continuum of human experience, your own breath mingling with the exhalations of all those who came before, your own dreams weaving themselves into the vast tapestry of Arabian memory. You are no longer just an observer of this ancient world, but a participant in its ongoing story, a keeper of its wisdom, a guardian of its beauty. The boundaries between past and present dissolve like morning mist, and you find yourself existing simultaneously in all the moments we have visited together. You are the Sabaean queen receiving tribute from distant kingdoms, and the simple Bedouin woman weaving patterns into her tent cloth. You are the Nabataean engineer calculating the precise angle needed for a water channel, and the Jewish merchant counting the profits from a successful caravan journey. You are the Christian hermit finding God in the desert silence, and the Hanif seeker questioning the meaning of existence beneath an infinity of stars. This is the true magic of history, the realization that the past is not a foreign country, but our own deepest home, the place where all our stories begin and to which they all ultimately return. The people we have met on this journey are not strangers but ancestors, not just of blood but of spirit, the ones who prepared the way for everything that was to come, who planted seeds in the desert soil that would one day bloom into gardens of extraordinary beauty. As sleep takes you deeper into its healing embrace, let yourself rest in the knowledge that you carry within you now a piece of their world, a fragment of their dreams, a whisper of their voices, their courage in facing the unknown, their resilience in adapting to change, their creativity in finding beauty and meaning in harsh circumstances. All of this becomes part of your own inner landscape, a source of strength and inspiration for whatever challenges await you in your own journey through time. The desert grows quiet now, the ancient voices fading to a gentle murmur like water flowing over smooth stones. The caravan routes grow empty, the temples fall silent, the great cities sink back into the sand from which they came. But the stories remain, the wisdom endures, the beauty persists in forms both seen and unseen, waiting to be discovered again by other travelers, other dreamers, other seekers of truth and meaning. Sleep now, peaceful wanderer through the corridors of time. Let your dreams be filled with the fragrance of frankincense and myrrh, with the sound of ancient poetry recited in voices warm with desert wind, with visions of rose-red cities carved from living rock and oasis gardens where palm trees whisper secrets to the stars. Rest in the embrace of history, in the comfort of continuity, in the knowledge that every ending is also a beginning, every sunset the promise of another dawn. The sands of time continue their eternal flow, covering and uncovering the traces of human passage, preserving what needs to be preserved, releasing what has served its purpose. And in this endless cycle of concealment and revelation, of forgetting and remembering, of sleeping and waking, we find our place in the great story that began before us and will continue long after we too have become dreams in the memory of the desert wind. Sleep deeply now, surrounded by the protective silence of the eternal sands, cradled in the arms of time itself, at peace with the knowledge that you have touched something timeless, something sacred, something that will remain with you always as a source of wonder and a reminder of the extraordinary richness of the human story. The last camel bell fades into silence. The final star disappears into the lightning sky of dawn. The ancient world of pre-Islamic Arabia settles back into the realm of dreams and memory, where it will wait patiently for the next curious soul who wishes to walk its moonlit paths and discover its hidden treasures. Until then, sleep well and dream of desert roses blooming in the sand.